Canadian Harold Howard.
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 My name is Harold Clarence Howard. I'm representing Canada and Niagara Falls in the Ultimate Fighting Challenge. We have a saying back home that if you're coming on,
How many fighters can you think of who stepped into the UFC Octagon with a mullet, wearing gi pants and a wife beater? A man who looked like a Street Fighter character and delivered knockouts like one too. The kind of guy who could throw a rolling thunder kick, suplex his opponent, and then, minutes later, deliver a post-fight interview that would melt itself into MMA folklore. How many Canadian karateka have you heard say the words, "We have a saying back home, if you're coming on,
come on!"
while staring straight into the camera with an intense, piercing glare? Not many. But there was one. Harold Clarence Howard. And if you only know him for his look, his catchphrase, or that famous flip kick, you're missing the most important, interesting part of the story. So today, we're going to take a proper look at the man, the myth, and the mayhem. A fighter who trained in an era before YouTube, competed before cross-training was standard, and stepped into the cage before it was really even a sport. How good was Harold Howard really? Buckle up for this one. Chapter 1, The Making of a Fighter. Before the cameras, before the Octagon, and way before the UFC became a household name, Harold Howard was just a 17-year-old kid walking into a dojo for the first time. The place? Richmond Hill, Ontario. The art? Jiu-Jitsu. And the teacher? A tough, old-school martial artist named Steve Reynolds. Now, Reynolds wasn't just any instructor. He was a Jiu-Jitsu Kai master and 5th degree black belt, and a student of the legendary Wally J., the man behind Small Circle Jiu-Jitsu. Under Reynolds' guidance, Howard earned his 3rd degree black belt in traditional Jiu-Jitsu. That was just the beginning of a journey that would take him from point fighting to bare-knuckle brawling, from classroom demos to cage fights. After a few years, Howard moved to Niagara Falls and got to work building something of his own. By 1983, he was already teaching karate and jiu-jitsu at local schools and the YMCA. Just a year later, he opened his own martial arts school, the Action Karate and Jiu-Jitsu Center. Eventually, it would evolve into the Niagara Fighting Griffin Fitness and Martial Arts Gym, a place that trained some of the top sport karate and sport jiu-jitsu competitors in the world. And Howard wasn't just running a dojo. He was simultaneously racking up credentials like a man possessed. Let's take a look. A 3rd degree black belt in Goju Ryu Karate under Yogi Israel. A 2nd degree black belt in Chito Ryu Karate under Monty Guest. And a 3rd degree black belt in Kitsune Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, a traditional Japanese system, not to be confused with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But back in the early 90s, most people didn't know the difference. Jiu-Jitsu was Jiu-Jitsu, and Howard's skills were often misread as being on par with the Gracie black belt. They weren't. Traditional Jiu-Jitsu focuses on throws, joint locks, and self-defense, but lacks the ground game and positional control that made Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu so dominant in early MMA. Still, Howard's credentials were legit. Then came Katsudo Te-Jitsu, Howard's own hybrid martial art, an original system built from his years cross-training, combining elements of karate, jiu-jitsu, and practical street fighting. He held a 6th degree black belt in this style, 2 full ranks above any of his students.
But I've, in the last few years, been creating a system of fighting that brings the karate aspect back into jiu-jitsu.
So we've got the belts, but what about the battlefield? Howard wasn't shy when it came to competition. He won the Canadian Heavyweight Karate Championship 3 years in a row, 1982, 1983, and 1984. He was selected for the Canadian national karate team in 1986 and 1987, earning a reputation as one of the country's top point fighters. But he didn't stop at karate. In 1984, Howard made history by becoming Canada's first ever sports jiu-jitsu heavyweight champion. Later, he represented Canada at the inaugural WCJO World Championships, picking up both team and individual gold. If you were active in traditional martial arts in Canada during the 1980s, chances are you knew Harold Howard. Or at least, you knew somebody who did. Now here's the question. How well does all of that traditional semi-contact experience prepare somebody for a no-holds-barred fight? The answer? Not too well. You see, point fighting ends after a touch. No follow-throughs, no ground and pound, no consequences. Meanwhile, kickboxers, wrestlers, judokas, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners were used to getting hit, used to getting taken down, and used to getting choked out. They trained in full-contact live scenarios. That kind of conditioning matters when the bell rings and nobody is coming to break it up. But here's what Howard did have. He was big, he was strong, he had power in both hands. He'd spent more than a few nights dealing with real violence, working security in tough Canadian bars. Now that's not the same as a full-contact fight, sure. But when things kick off in the dark, there's no referee, no mat, and no warning. Howard learned to stay calm when things got loud, and more importantly, when they got physical. That kind of experience sticks with you. By 1988, he had hit a wall. A serious back injury forced him out of competition and into surgery. For a while, it looked like his fighting days were behind him. But Howard wasn't ready to tap out just yet. By 1992, he was back in action, storming his way to the finals in the National Black Belt League World Championships. He didn't win, his back flared up again, and he had to pull out, but he proved he could still hang with the best. All of this happened before he ever stepped into the UFC. So when Harold Howard finally walked out at UFC 3 in 1994, he wasn't just some wild card. He was a traditional martial artist, a national champion, a barroom bouncer, and a guy who'd already been through the fire and walked back out. It was time to see how his skills stacked up for the biggest test of his lifetime, the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Chapter 2.
The Ultimate Fighting Challenge.
What was it like stepping into the Octagon for UFC 3 in 1994? Picture a smoky, crowded arena in Charlotte, North Carolina, buzzing with anticipation. The air was thick with tension. The crowd was eager to see who would survive this brutal, raw proving ground. Into this charged atmosphere walked the formidable Canadian Harold Howard, eyes focused, ready for war. Before his first fight, Howard gave fans a glimpse of his dangerous prowess. He struck a duct-taped bag filled with dry cement, his fists bursting through and filling the room with clouds of choking dust. It was a moment that set the tone. This was a man with power you could see, power you could feel. Howard's opening opponent was Roland Payne, an aptly named kickboxer who claimed extensive bare-knuckle experience. From the opening bell, Howard took command, mixing thunderous right hands with trips and throws rooted in his jiu-jitsu background. A suplex here, a sumigashi there. Payne fought valiantly, but after a series of powerful shots sent him crashing to the canvas, referee Big John McCarthy stopped the fight at just 46 seconds into the first round. The victory was decisive. Howard was a problem that others would have to solve. Next came the fight fans had been craving, Harold Howard versus Royce Gracie. Royce was the reigning UFC champion who had already reshaped combat sports. He was a formidable challenge. Could Howard's blend of karate and jiu-jitsu withstand the legendary Brazilian's ground game? Howard was confident. In his pre-fight interview, he explained that he had developed a system reintroducing karate elements into jiu-jitsu.
We should point out that Mr. Gracie is a master of jiu-jitsu on the ground. So, me being a jiu-jitsu person, I can appreciate that more than the other competitors because I am a grappler also. But I have, in the last few years, been creating a system of fighting that brings the karate aspect back into jiu-jitsu, which means that I'm working so that the person does not have to get to grapple you. So I'm looking forward to meeting Mr. Gracie on the mat, but I'm also looking forward to allowing myself to let my karate aspect of it take over too. So we'll see. And the best man will win, and that's all there is to it.
The anticipation was electric, but things were about to change. Royce, coming off a grueling battle with Chemo Leopoldo, entered the octagon physically spent. So much so that his family practically carried him during their famous Gracie train walk to the cage. Helson Gracie was seen massaging Royce's neck in a desperate attempt to revive him, as Royce slumped over the side of the octagon, barely standing. Across the cage, Howard bounced up and down, his eyes fixed on Royce. The tension was palpable. Before the bell could ring, the doctor in Royce's corner, including his brother Horion, a promoter of the event, decided he could not continue. A towel was thrown in, and Harold Howard advanced to the finals without throwing a single punch. Was this a win for Howard and a loss for Royce? Many at the time, including fighters like Ken Shamrock, argued it should have been recorded as such. Yet officially, it wasn't, leaving fans puzzled and perplexed.
Okay, Harold Howard versus Royce Gracie. They walk to the ring, they make the announcements, they ring the bell, Royce throws in the towel. Are you aware that that's a no contest on Harold Howard's record?
It's what?
It's a no contest on Harold Howard's record.
There's a no contest on Royce's record, too.
That's correct.
Right. Yeah. It's a
Do
lie.
you think that's right?
It's a lie. He forfeited.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He
That's
walked
just-
into the ring. He walked into the ring and got paid. That made it a loss. If he would have not walked into the ring and backed out because he was injured, then it's a no contest. But because he walked in, threw in the towel, he forfeited the fight. He lost.
Fastest UFC finish ever.
Ever. Yeah.
This is my pursuit for justice for Harold Howard.
Had Royce been able to compete, could Howard's size, strength, and heavy hands have changed the outcome? It's impossible to say, but the moment solidified Howard's place in MMA folklore as a fighter who showed up when others faltered.
Charlie, what's it like being the corner of the fastest UFC stoppage ever?
Oh, yeah, it's
That's a record.
That's the record. Never mind Jorge Macedo Ben Askren. It's Harold Howard over Royce Gracie.
Absolutely.
yeah, when you think about it, yeah. I never
That
thought
mullet,
of it that way.
that mullet scared the shit out of Gracie.
The night's drama didn't end there. Ken Shamrock, the other expected finalist, was sidelined after sustaining an injury in his semifinal match against Felix Mitchell. It wasn't even supposed to be Mitchell. Shamrock was supposed to fight Keith Hackney, the skilled White Tiger Kempo Kung Fu fighter who shattered his hand in the opening match against the head of a 600-pound, 6'8" sumo wrestler named Emmanuel Yarborough. Adding to the night's chaos, Chemo Leopoldo and his manager, murderer, Joe Sun, stormed the octagon upon learning Royce couldn't continue. Chemo believed he deserved a title shot, having given Royce a tough fight, but the UFC had other plans. Enter Steve Jenham, a relatively unknown off-duty police officer and ninjutsu fighter from Omaha, Nebraska. At 5'10" and 195 pounds, Jenham was physically outmatched by Howard, but what he lacked in size, he made up for in general skill. From the outset, Howard's confidence was evident. He feinted powerful right hands to keep Jenham on his back foot and even launched his signature rolling thunder flip kick, but it missed, wide. After a failed guillotine attempt and strikes that failed to finish Jenham, Howard began to look fatigued. Jenham tripped him to the mat and worked to mount position, raining down strikes, forcing Howard to submit at 1 minute, 27 seconds of the first round. Despite the loss, Howard's sportsmanship and mutual respect shone through. He congratulated Jenham graciously and later entertained fans with a candid post-fight interview that highlighted his honesty and good humor.
Well, I told you if it worked, it worked. And it didn't, I didn't. So in the end, it didn't.
He also expressed his love for his family.
I love you, children. I love your wife, and I believe it or not, I love my family too.
It's unbelievable. Just a true champion. It's just super. It's a great fight. It's a really good fight.
Is this a young Leonardo DiCaprio at UFC 3?
What's it like stepping back in the octagon after the highs and lows of UFC 3? For Harold Howard, UFC 7 was another chance to prove himself, this time in Buffalo, New York, under the bright lights of the Memorial Auditorium. The atmosphere was electric, fans hungry for brutal battles, and the stakes higher than ever in this 8-man, no-holds-barred tournament. Howard was matched up against Mark Hall, a young and hungry fighter with a background in Taekwondo and kickboxing. Hall was no stranger to grappling either, making him a dangerous opponent for a striker like Howard. When the cage door slammed shut, it was clear both men were eager to make their mark. Howard opened up with his trademark power, landing a heavy right hand that echoed through the arena. But Hall was quick to close the distance, dragging Howard down into the murky waters of ground fighting. Here, Hall's control and pressure began to tell. Howard found himself trapped beneath the relentless ground and pound assault. The referee, Big John McCarthy, watched closely as Howard tried to defend himself, but the onslaught was too much, and at just 1 minute 41 seconds into the first round, Howard signaled that he had had enough, and the fight was stopped. For a fighter who had once burst through a cement-filled bag with raw power, this was a humbling moment. It laid bare the brutal evolution of the sport, where every fighter now had to have at least some legitimate experience of ground fighting to compete. But if the outcome was disappointing, Howard's courage and grit were undeniable. He stepped in the cage, knowing the risks, ready to battle in the rapidly changing arena that was pushing fighters to adapt or be left behind. UFC 7 was a snapshot of MMA's growing pains, and Harold was right in the thick of it. Chapter 3. Take Me Home Tonight. You could almost feel the humidity when Harold Howard stepped into the ring in Brazil for his final fight. It was 1996 and the stage was Universal Vale Tudo 3, a no-rules throwback to the brutal roots of MMA. Held in a compact, intense Vale Tudo ring, this wasn't the glitz of pay-per-view. It was the heart-pounding, raw theater of real combat. Howard's opponent was Hugo Duarte, a notorious figure in Brazilian Vale Tudo and Luta Livre Esportiva. Duarte was already famous for his rivalry with the Gracies, most famously brawling with Hicks and Gracie on a Rio de Janeiro beach in one of the defining clashes of the Luta Livre versus Gracie Jiu-Jitsu feud. This was no ordinary opponent. Duarte embodied the raw, street-tested side of Brazilian fighting culture. The fight itself was mercilessly short. Howard, always game, met Duarte head-on, but within seconds, Duarte maneuvered quickly into the mount and began unleashing heavy strikes. Just 29 seconds in, Harold Howard was forced to submit to punches. Abrupt, final, harsh. That loss sealed Harold Howard's professional MMA record at 1-3. 1 thunderous knockout win, 3 hard defeats. Each telling their own story, but all part of the larger journey. When he returned home, Howard didn't stumble. He stood tall, back in the dojo, teaching karate, welcoming roughly 40 students through the doors of his small school. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about giving back, passing on lessons learned from bruising fights and an even more bruising life. And to keep grounded, he climbed roofs by day, working in construction as a roofer, a hands-on job that echoed the discipline and resilience he taught in class. Harold Howard didn't walk away with championship belts or a stacked record, but he walked away with something more enduring: respect. From the people who learned from him, the opponents who shared the cage with him, and the fans who still remember a fighter who didn't just compete, but captivated. Chapter 4, From Cult Hero to Cautionary Tale. For more than a decade after UFC 3, Harold Howard lived on in memory and MMA internet forums as a cult figure. But after the cheering stopped, what happened to the Canadian wild man? What became of the fighter who once threw some serious heat in the Octagon? For years, nobody really knew. Then in 2009, Howard suddenly resurfaced. That February, he gave an interview with Sherdog. At first, it sounded like life was steady if a little bruised. He was teaching karate, spending time with family, reflecting on his place in the sport. He admitted to some setbacks, losing a job, almost losing a home, even being struck by a car once at the fair. But the story read like a nostalgic, "Where are they now?" It reassured fans that the old warrior was still standing tall. But what if I told you that within months, that same man would be driving a truck through the doors of a casino? By October of 2009, the cracks began to show. Howard grew suspicious, accusing his wife of infidelity, convinced that people were plotting against him. His thoughts turned darker, his behavior more erratic. Then came December 9th. Howard arrived at the Toronto Star offices carrying a briefcase. To some, he looked like a businessman, but his clothes were worn thin. His knuckles were raw, stained with dried blood. He told staff there was a plot to destroy his life, that he had been injected with a liquid that hardened his veins. As security moved him towards the exit, he muttered a chilling phrase: "On to Plan B." 2 weeks later, the world would learn exactly what Plan B was. In the early hours of December 22nd, Howard's paranoia finally erupted. Neighbors were jolted awake by screams as he attacked his sister and nephew with a claw hammer. The nephew managed to fight him off, bloodied but still alive, buying just enough time for Howard to flee into the night. Behind the wheel of his pickup, Howard drove first to his estranged wife's home, where he tried to force his way inside. When that failed, his focus shifted on her workplace, Niagara Falls' sprawling Fallsview Casino. And here, Harold Howard's life descended into pure chaos. Around 2 a.m., with no plan, just pure delusion, he aimed his truck at the glittering glass entrance of Canada's largest casino. Then he hit the gas. The impact was deafening. Shattering glass, crumpling steel, concrete shaking with the force of the crash. Howard's body slammed against the cab, knocking him unconscious. Security staff and first responders rushed in, stunned that nobody else had been hurt. Had it been just a few hours earlier, those doors would have been packed with patrons. The result could have been catastrophic. The fighter who once dreamed of UFC glory was now being dragged off from the wreckage in handcuffs. Howard was charged with attempted murder, assault with a weapon, attempted breaking and entering, and evading police. And in court, the surreal details of his delusion came spilling out. He claimed his family was poisoning him, that his wife was part of a prostitution ring, and that their son was being passed around in a pedophile network. His sister and nephew said that he had been battling a painkiller addiction for decades, dating back to the 1980s, long before the UFC ever came calling. In 2010, Howard was sentenced to 52 months in prison. His ex-wife called it far too lenient. And prison did not bring clarity. Inside, Howard was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He believed his prescribed medication, Seroquel, was being used to sedate him so that other inmates could rape him. He alleged conspiracies involving prison staff, doctors, and fellow inmates. He spent months in solitary confinement, trapped not just in his cell, but in his own unraveling mind. By 2011, he was moved to Kingston Penitentiary's Regional Treatment Center. Forced to take antipsychotic medication, the fog began to lift. Slowly, the Harold Howard of old resurfaced. In 2013, he walked free after serving just under 4.5 years. Back in Niagara Falls, he opened a small karate class again, held seminars, and tried to carve out a quieter life. But the image of Harold Howard had changed forever. His life became a cautionary tale, a story of fleeting triumph overshadowed by tragedy. Conclusion. Harold Howard's story is one of extremes. In the cage, he was far from being a perfect fighter. His record shows as much, but he was fearless enough to step into the unknown during the raw and unforgiving era of no-holds-barred fighting. That alone deserves respect. Outside of the Octagon, his life spiraled through pain, addiction, and tragedy, turning a cult hero into a cautionary tale. But even with all of that, Howard's name is etched into the early history of mixed martial arts. He was there at the beginning, willing to test himself when the sport was still chaos, still dangerous, still real. And if Harold Howard ever happens to see this, our door is always open. We would love nothing more than to have him on the MMA History Podcast to share his own story in his own words to the audience who would most appreciate hearing it. I'm Joey from the MMA History Podcast. Thanks for taking this journey with us.